A Friday night's video in our second master series. I do believe this is the 46th video in our second master series, and the 7th video dealing with stereo field, and we are looking for footprints. So we've got a pretty good understanding what we're looking for when we're looking for a basic footprint. Now let's take a look. When we're talking about footprints, we're looking for pretty clean footprints. Now if I've decided that I do not want I've got this nice stereo field thing happening, but a lot of times that just for like the out front vocal and maybe the chorus that's supporting tracks underneath it that are pretty much sitting on top of the mix. And everything else is somewhere going to have to find its place in the mix. So most of the time it's going to get panned somewhere and either left mono. So you've got basically what we're looking at as mono here. And then you'd have another one that's off to the other side. Let's say this one's panned right 75 and this one's left 75, that you're going to get this. Now you see this going, you've got a pretty good stereo field, but what's happening? This is an issue. The first issue that we come to with the footprints, that we've got this nice mono track here that's nice and clean looking. As soon as I add this track is going to look just like that one off to the other side. But when I put them together, what do I get? Okay, so what's happening here? You're seeing it trying to go right and left at different spots when these two instruments are working against each other or with each other, which may not all be hitting notes at the same exact time and things like that as they move through time, correct? So you get this thing happening. So some of these changes that we're looking at aren't necessarily bad when we're mixing things together trying to fix the stereo field, because for a minute it goes off to the right or left or something like that, or some other direction, because that's where that track is. It's only a problem when it stands out by itself and it's not mixing well. Now this other issue is those are just dealing with mono tracks. So this really takes some experimentation on your part, really mapping out footprints of what's happening. So let's say I've got this one 75 and I've got this other track that's either a duplicated track of it that I've done a little bit differently, like we've talked about when using the same microphone, but wanting to sound a little bit different to make it sound like we've got two separate recordings. And this one is, I've gone to right 65 so that I get a little more stereo width. All right, so now I've got a little more stereo width here happening on this track. Right, that way, because I might only have a bass, a guitar, and a drum with a vocalist, and I want to make it sound nice and full and not thin and tinny, and so I'm trying to add a little bit of stereo width. So I've done some work and some delays on this one here to where I've added like 12.4 milliseconds. I've done some detuning on the second track and equalized it a little bit differently. Trying and getting away from the phase issue, because sometimes when you put delay on there, this sounds fine, but in another instance, 12.8 milliseconds, 12.8 minutes might sound fine, or 7 milliseconds, and you have to experiment with it to try to escape the phase pitfall, because that sound you have to escape, and sometimes it's just not going to show you on a phase meter. But we've got this footprint now, that it's a nice footprint, and we've got it basically where we want, and we've mapped this out to where we've got it right 75 and right 65. That gives a little bit of its own space in a small production and widen it out some. And to the other side, I've got this one left 75 and left 65. And what's that going to do? You're going to have, if I turn these off, then I've got the same thing happen on the other side that's a little bit wider. So then again, we add them together, and what do we get? So we're trying to shoot for the stereo field that at points you're going to see a really nice full round stereo field because of them meshing together to create this full stereo field in this nice round footprint that's got a nice full effect. But like we talked about, sometimes they're not hitting at the same time, so all of a sudden it's going left, or all of a sudden it's going right, or all of a sudden it's doing some other thing. But we're not seeing a whole lot of that racetrack thing going on. It doesn't seem to be doing that much at all. We're not seeing this weird thing looking that's going on that is some, looks like some kind of racetrack going on all over the place. Now, these kind of footprints are great because most of the time, if we fuss with our equalization on these tracks, our delays, our detunings, and our pannings and things like that, and really take our time so that they sound good while we're creating this, that most of the time these footprints are what we're looking for. So now we've got this footprint that basically might shoot off to one side or the other every now and then. You can see it doing this X thing a little bit here and there, and or but then it shoots into this nice full stereo field that looks nice and granular, it looks nice and full, and it's doing that's what it should look like. Does that make sense? So this, you can experiment with this a lot, trying to map out footprints, but this is a huge lesson now, because as you understand this and you know that you're looking for this, and you understand when you see those differences to where it doesn't look like this. Now that we can see that, and we've got this mix going like that, and it doesn't look like this one, that it's all starts doing this racetrack thing, doing this other thing, doing this other thing here, and what is that? That's kind of a problem. Now, the issue here is when you're dealing with like an out front vocal, or a stereo vocal track, or stereo chorus tracks and things like that, that sometimes you get some of that. In the last video, we tried to straighten that out some. And you can get into finer detail and go as you do things like flow editing and things like that we talked about in the first master series, and really go fine tune areas like, you've got a problem right here, or this area here, or right here, that it's fine all along there except for this area right here. So you're actually cutting the audio here on one side or the other, maybe splitting that stereo track to try to fix a problem, to try to fix any of those issues that we're talking about that may or may not be a huge problem. I myself, I go through there and look at it most of the time as I'm working, that I clean up most of that stuff, but it takes a while to get used to doing it. Now, when we've got this, that's that vocal track here, and I've got it off to one side, and I've got this other instrument that's working along with it, and I've got this nice footprint. The nice footprint is nice and granular. It may be shooting off to one side or the other, but it gets full when it's supposed to, when they're working together. And when one of them shoots off by itself, when there's a break on the other side, you might see it shoot off to one way or the other. But I don't see it, trying to flatline on me. It's not trying to mono on me or something like that, which it might be. I might have a track in there that gets mixed in next that's mono center, like a kick drum, I maybe duplicated the track and tried to widen it a little bit, but it might be pretty mono. So then we'd have that on there also, because then on top of that, we might have something like, let's see, this drum hit going on here, and this drum hit hits on here, and it's like, okay, now we got that nice stereo field, and we got this drum hit on top of it, right? So now this drum hit is actually hitting with it. So if you look on here, that this drum hit is actually hitting along in time with it as it goes along there, correct? But it doesn't really showing it too much, is it? But it is changing the stereo field. If we actually sat down and looked at it and, analyzed it real well, you would see a little bit of a difference because of it hitting there. But as you go through there, that you got a pretty good understanding what kind of footprints you're looking at. Your biggest issue most of the time, looking for problems isn't that big a deal. You'll notice when you've got a problem, and you can hear it. Sometimes it might look fine on the phase meter, and you're thinking, well, it looks like a decent footprint, but I've got something going on, or it just sounds funky, and you're going to have to adjust it, because I've found myself, I don't know how many times, going 12.4 milliseconds is not right, 12.3 works just fine. And it's just like, for some reason, it's working well, and it doesn't, and it's not sounding bad, which is, I've never been able to come up with any kind of system that really defines why that is, because it can be different with different instruments, or different captures, or different synth plugins, or different patches, or different microphones, or different environments. All kinds of things play on it. But the basic footprint that we're looking for is pretty obvious. So now that you understand basically what you're looking at, that when you start working on your stuff, that you're going to be working with mono tracks. Now, if you got two mono tracks, we already looked at that. So if I have this one mono track and this other mono track, these two instruments, we see what happens there. These are just those two tracks mono. And the stereo field is going to lessen. Well, it's got less volume, and that's going to be an issue. The actual stereo field, what it's doing, isn't probably all that different, but it's lessened, and the volume's lessened, obviously. And so I turn this one on and that one on, and the volume is going to increase, which may make you perceive that it's widening. Well, it is widening to a degree because these individuals at that, like these two that are going off to the right, are wider, and these ones off to the left are wider. So this stereo field is going to get wider. Does that make sense? It's going to look fuller rather than cutting some of them off. It's going to be a little bit thinner in a stereo field, and it'll sound thinner. But the concept here is most of the time when we're mixing, we've got out front tracks and supportive tracks that sometimes we can do really nice stereo field, wide stereo field with. And most other tracks, depending on how many instruments we got, we're trying to look for mono, and then we know what happens when we're looking at mono, and we know what happens when they start to work together. And also we're looking at tracks besides just mono that we want to fatten up a little bit in a production that doesn't have too many instruments. Like if this thing had, 200 instruments in it, like it was a symphony or a big pop song, I certainly wouldn't be trying to widen all those immensely, because it would just get sounding muddy. It would be just too much. Does that make sense? I mean, it would eventually bog down, just getting sounding like a muddy mess. So it's a pretty simple concept as far as footprints. Now, there can be different situations. So whatever way you're used to setting up your tracks, duplicating tracks, using two microphones for captures, all that kind of stuff, how you're going to pan them, how you're going to put delays on one side of there, how you're going to EQ one of them different from the other, and cleaning them up and doing notch filtering, things like that, and detuning one of them possibly, and things like that, that it's a work in progress. But getting positioning of where you think you're going to do things, and then looking at it and then studying it on the phase meter so you can start to see footprints, because it's going to become really obvious in time. As you do some certain thing, it's going to show you a footprint. Now, this is a nice footprint, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to want a nice footprint. I mean, with all due respect to great audio engineers, that you might want a really crappy footprint for something you're doing. You got this section in this song and it just sounds horrible. I mean, it's not, I mean, I know that sounds funny because it's kind of backwards. It sounds horrible, but it's great for what you're trying to do. Because in some situations, I've heard some music come out that way. And it's like, that's great. That sounds really cool. But actually, it's horrible. It really is. And it's not engineered well. And it's kind of messy. But it sounds really good for the situation and the, effect they were trying to do. But it's going to leave a footprint. There's no doubt about it. So you're going to want to know what that is, and study why that is. And you'll probably, by the time you understand these footprints and understand what I'm trying to relate to you, that if it's not a good footprint that we're looking at and you're trying to shoot for something else because of the way it sounds, it's going to manifest itself as a footprint in some way. Now, this is a real simple relation of just trying to see footprints. Now, you can take this to extremes, and you becoming that next level master audio engineer, I expect you to, because not all mixes are all pretty and nice and well put together like a little shoebox and everything's together. Sometimes the things just ain't that way. Sometimes mixes are a little bit dirty and rough and raw and gritty, and they just are, and it comes out sounding cool. It's like, that is really cool, dude, and I've heard stuff like that. I mean, I'm not going to say that, as an audio engineer, that I want to fuss with it, and I want to make it as nice as possible, but you can only polish up, something you want rustic so much before it just ain't rustic anymore, bro. Do you know what I'm saying? And this can be the same issue. So it's going to leave a footprint. Now, this concept is pretty simple, and it's not really complicated. It's not nowhere near as complicated as like trying to deal with footprints from like when we're dealing with, trying to look at the oscilloscope or something like that. These footprints are very complex, like we've talked about, but the simple thing that most of the time we're looking for isn't that complicated and isn't that difficult. When you know you're looking for this, that it's a pretty simple concept. And when you're not seeing that, there is some type of issue and you need to do some work to try to rectify things so that you're getting something that looks nice, unless you're trying to make it rustic and you're not worried about it and it sounds right for whatever you're trying to do, which is an opinion thing, which is impossible to teach. Is something you're going to learn on your own and becoming that next level master audio engineer. So peace, hope, love. I certainly enjoyed you watching this next video on footprints, and I will see you in the next video.